This video is a complete walkthrough of how we film B-roll for a client. Today's client is the Shop by EBNS, which is a retail and iced drink shop. So the first thing we do when we walk into a space to film B-roll is look at the lighting. In this case, we have these overhead lights and then we have these big bay windows. And the main issue is that they're different color temperatures. So a lot of the times, if we have windows in a room, we'll try to use just natural light and turn off all the indoor lights. The reverse of that though is if we do only have the overhead lights, we just kind of deal with it and work with what we have. But the main reason we turn them off in the case of a window is so that we have more consistent color temperature. So Kenzie, do you mind turning off these overhead lights?
Yes.
One downside of turning off the overhead lights is you do lose exposure. So if we are in a situation where we do need more light, we actually bring in one of our own lights and use it to complement the window light. And the two ways we do this is we either use the light and we can shine it on the subject, or a common thing we do is we actually just point at the ceiling because most of the buildings we film in have white ceilings. And it just serves as like bringing up the light floor of the room and providing more exposure and ambient light. And it also helps reduce the contrast if, for example, there's too much shadow on one side of the face. So this is an example of what our light looks when we film B-roll. So we have a light on a light stand, and then we actually like to battery power it because these batteries will power this light at full power for like between an hour and two. And typically that's how long we film B-roll, so we don't need to worry about plugging in the light. If there is an outlet nearby, that's no problem. Today we're shooting on a daylight light. However, our main B-roll filming light is actually bicolor. That way, if we're filming in a room that doesn't have any windows, we can still use the overhead lights, and then we match the color of our B-roll light to the overhead light so we have a consistent color temperature. The other part of our B-roll filming light, which is optional, is we use a mini softbox, and the reason for that is when we bounce the light off a ceiling, it provides a more even spread. And then we can also use the light, because it's a softbox, to actually shine directly on a person if needed. So in this example, I'm going to set up this light, Kenzie, and then I'm going to show what it looks like in that same spot. So the goal of the B-roll is to complement the interview footage. So what we do is we brainstorm a variety of activities that we can film to use in the edited video. In addition to a variety of activities, we also want to capture a variety of shots so that we can edit it together in a sequence. So for example, the first activity we're going to film is Kenzie restocking. And when we do this, I'm going to brainstorm 5 different shots. First, I start with kind of the most boring, basic shot possible just to start shooting. And this is usually an establishing shot. So I'm gonna grab an establishing shot. I'm gonna grab an over-the-shoulder shot of what Kenzie's doing. I'm gonna grab a reverse of that to see her face. I'm gonna grab an insert, so a close-up of whatever she's interacting with. And then I'm gonna think of some sort of creative shot, and that comes up with 5 shots. I would say at a minimum, try to get 3 shots for each activity, because that way when you're editing, you have 3 different angles to cut to. However, more is better. For camera settings, it kind of comes down to creative taste. A lot of the times for B-roll, we shoot handheld or on a gimbal because that allows us to move quickly. We also shoot with a zoom lens so we can quickly switch angles. And we usually shoot in 24 frames per second. However, we do shoot in higher frame rates, but we've become more intentional about when we want it. When shooting handheld, the main thing we focus on is trying to get stable footage. A lot of the times we aren't moving the camera unless the subject in the frame is moving. We're acting more as like a tripod. So we try to stay as steady as possible so there isn't any unnecessary camera shake. For compositions, my main tip is just be intentional about it. So when you frame up a shot, it should clearly communicate what you're trying to communicate. So for example, when we frame a shot of the merchandise on the shelf, we want to show just the merchandise. We don't want to have too much space or some random object where it's not clear where the viewer should be looking at. Another way to think about this is fill the frame. So fill the frame with exactly what you want to see. There are exceptions to the rule. For example, a lot of the times I use negative space in my compositions. So as long as you're intentional about that negative space, it'll still look good. So the way we handle exposure when filming B-roll is we use a technique called exposing to the right, which essentially means if you picture a histogram where the left side of the histogram is pure black and the right side is pure white, we raise the exposure until just before pure white. And the way we detect that is we use zebras on our cameras, zebra stripes, which is a black and white line that shows you the overexposed areas of the image. So if you see the zebra stripes, it means that area is overexposed. So we raise it until we see the brightest part in the room has those zebra stripes, and then we lower the exposure to just below that. There are exceptions to when you're gonna see zebra stripes no matter what. For example, if you're shooting inside and there's a window, a lot of the time that window is gonna be overexposed and there's nothing you can do about it without using a lot of lights, so that's all right. So in those instances, we just pick another object in the room that we wanna be the brightest. The other thing that will always have zebra stripes is practical lights in the room. So if there's like a light bulb, we don't worry about that because we know that's gonna be overexposed. So if we try to expose for the light bulb, the entire room would be too dark. So lastly, before we start shooting, make sure you record long enough. So a lot of the times it's instinctual to like quickly push record and then stop recording because in the moment it feels like a long time. However, when you start editing the footage, you realize you don't have enough to work with. So try to record for like a minimum of 5 seconds. That way you have enough in and out points to edit with. When I'm filming people, for example, like some B-roll of people talking, I'll actually record up to 30 seconds because you never know like when the best moment is or when somebody's gonna laugh. That way you'll have enough to work with later. Let's see, what's a fun thing to do? Would you like to do the cups or the sweaters?
Maybe the cups.
Sure. When we start filming B-roll, we're gonna be doing the same thing over and over again. So what I'm gonna have you do is we're gonna restock these cups. So I'll have you grab maybe 3 of these cups off the shelf. And then when I say action, that's your cue to start putting the cups on the shelf. And sometimes I might say pause. And when I say pause, you just pause and I'll say action again and you can keep restocking. Okay. And then there's no audio for this, so you don't have to worry about saying anything silly on camera and us picking it up. So I'm gonna frame up a shot and then I'll say action when I'm ready for you, Kenzie. What I'm gonna do for this first composition is, because she's kind of in the center already and the name of her store is above that shelf, I'm gonna just kind of make a symmetrical composition. All right, whenever you're ready, you can start, Kenzie. This time I'm gonna go over your shoulder to see how you're stacking them. If we're doing a shot like this where like someone's putting something somewhere, what I'll ask them to do is put the object where it's gonna end up so I can grab focus, and then I'll have them take it away so that when they put it where they're going to, it'll be in focus. This also applies to people too. For example, if someone's about to sit down in a chair, maybe I'll have them start by sitting in the chair, grab focus, and then have them stand up. Another thing when directing clients is they don't always know the film term. So when you say like grab focus, action, stop, you have to instruct them like, what do you actually mean when you say these things? Because it's typically everybody's first time filming B-roll. All right, pause. I'm gonna reset so I see a little more of the cups when you do it. And then also because I see your face in the shot, I'll have you be a little happy while you're restocking. Okay. It'll feel a little unnatural, yeah, but it'll look good on camera. Okay. So you can kind of wear a soft smile while you stock the shelves. All right, so now that we kind of got the safe shots, I'm gonna try to brainstorm some creative angles to capture while she's doing this. And action. Pause. Another thing, so the reason I called pause was I saw a biker go in the window outside. So in addition to the composition, you just have to pay attention to like what's happening in the frame so that when you go to editing, you think you had a nice medium shot, but then it turned out something bad was happening in the background that made the shot unusable. And then I'll think of one more shot. Something I like about this is it has the name of her store right above the shelving. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna frame up a shot where kind of the focus of the shot is the name of the store, but then I'll have Kenzie in one of the lower corners of the frame. So our second setup is going to be Kenzie using the sewing machine, and a couple notes about decisions I made before starting to film. First off is I placed her at this table intentionally because one, I want her on this side of the table so that her face is facing the window to provide soft lighting. The second thing is by placing her here, there's a lot of the store in the background, and what that allows is it's gonna give us depth of field when we do more close shots, and it also just provides a sense of space. Lastly, I used our additional B-roll light because we're still shooting with the interior lights turned off. I put the B-roll light just to give a little bit more exposure to the background. Now this is a little bit of like an unnatural look, but to me, it looks aesthetically better, and that's kind of the direction I'm going for with this video. Kenzie, again, we're gonna do the thing where I say action, stop, or action, pause, because now you don't have to redo anything, you'll just be doing the same thing. Okay. So I'll let you know when I'm framed up in my shot, and then when I say action, I'll let you go. So I'm picking a shot at a pretty wide angle because I'm going to be showing off her store. So when somebody is actually doing their actual work and it's a more repetitive task, what I'll let them do is I'll say, okay, when I say action, you start working, and I'm just gonna walk around and get different angles so you can just continue working and then until I say stop. So in this case, that's what we're gonna do, Kenzie. I'm gonna have you start, and then I'll walk around for a few minutes getting different shots, and I'll let you know when I'm finished. And action. Could you bend down a little bit so you can see the lens? Do you know what I mean? Like maybe turn your head to, maybe turn your head while looking at that.
What if I backed up?
You backed up, that would be great too. So now we're switching over to using the gimbal, and here are a couple things to keep in mind when using the gimbal. First thing is keep your shots nice and steady. Even though the gimbal is electronically stabilized, you still have to use smooth motions to get the most out of it. Second, and which is personally my most important thing, is pick one camera movement and stick to it throughout your shot. What I mean by that is instead of doing a shot where you're walking forward and then all of a sudden you pan at the end for no reason, stick to one camera movement. So that shot's either gonna be you walking forward or it's gonna be you panning. The exception to this rule is if you are following a subject that's moving erratically. Otherwise, I find that sticking to one camera movement looks more professional and more intentional. There are a couple camera movements I go to when using the gimbal. First one's a dolly type shot if I'm just going forward and backwards, or a tracking shot and going left to right. A common shot that I use is a parallax shot where the background is kind of moving at a different speed as the foreground. So that shot you accomplish by going left to right and then rotating the camera at the same time to keep the subject in frame. Then you can always get more advanced with gimbal movements by combining different types of shots. For example, adding a tilt to a dolly forward or a tilt to a rotate. Today, I'm gonna keep it pretty simple and do some tracking in and out shots and some parallax style shots. All right, you can start whenever you're ready, Kenzie. And sometimes I do multiple takes because gimbal shots can be trickier, so it's sometimes useful to get 2 takes in case you make a mistake on the first one. I'm gonna switch to a dolly style shot where I push in on the subject. And then I'll walk backwards to get a similar style shot. Gimbals are also useful to grab establishing shots of places because if you're grabbing an establishing shot of a building, there's no movement. So by using the gimbal, you can add movement to a shot if nothing in the shot is moving itself. So now we're gonna film Kenzie making cold brew. And because the cold brew station is the back of the store, it wasn't getting much natural light. And we tried experimenting with using daylight on our own lights, but it was becoming too contrasty. So what we're actually gonna do is we are gonna turn on the overhead lights, and because we're using the overhead lights, which are color balanced tungsten, we're going to use our bicolor LED and set that color temperature to tungsten as well. And the way we set color temperature when we're filming in rooms with overhead lights is we use a white balance card. We'll hold the white balance card, we'll set the white balance, and then whatever that white balance is, we'll set it to our bicolor light. So this is an example before we color balance to tungsten. So I hold the color balance card kind of where the subject's gonna be, especially if we have mixed color temperature. This is what the image looks like now that we color balanced it. You can see there's still a bit of blue coming from the window, and then we just don't have enough exposure, so I'm gonna turn on one of our lights. And this is what the image looks like with the correct color balance and our light turned on. All right, and action. Okay, so we're good with that. We're gonna do another one, and I'll say pause and stop more often so we can get multiple takes out of one cup. Got that logo. Raise it a little higher. Pause. Action. Nice. Now I'm gonna turn off the light, and then you can turn off the backlight too.
Okay.
So the sun came out a little bit more, and we ended up getting better natural light. So I'm gonna do a couple shots with just the natural light because that's typically our preference. And then I also brought the gimbal out to get some more variety. All right, all set, Kenzie?
Yeah.
Action. 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 Awesome. And action. Pause. You stay there, and then yeah, I'll have you take it away. Action. Then I'll let it drip for a bit. Yeah, going past the logo. That's the shot.